You're listening to the Voice of Reason with Mark Reed and Ted Durden, only on LA Talk Radio.
Good evening, and welcome to another edition of the Voice of Reason. My name is Ted Durden, a Southern Democrat.
And my name is Mark Reed, a West Coast Republican.
And together we are the Voice of Reason. Well, those of you tuning in for the very first time, this is a politically motivated podcast where civil discourse is the order of the day. And as I do every week, having said that, I'll toss the ball over to my co-host, Mark Reed.
Absolutely. This is my week to give a monologue.
Yes,
and
it is.
I actually didn't really prepare one because we have a fascinating guest that Bob Woodson is going to be coming on at 7:15. Mm-hmm. And we're going to get into the conversation as we have on several different episodes in regards to racism. But this one's going to be about racism versus classism in America.
Right.
And I told you one of the questions I'll be asking Bob, and that is for him to define, so we have that level, understanding of what is prejudice, what is discrimination, what is racism.
Right.
Because what we're watching in the news today with all of these incidents that are taking place is a catastrophe all the way around.
It is.
It really is. And this is something that we had discussed about the weaponizing of racism by the Democrat Party and by the media. It's not even the Democrats anymore. The media is harping on it so much. And it's getting to the point to where they are supporting wholeheartedly vigilantism throughout the country and accepting the riots that are going on, accepting the burning down, the destruction of families, the destruction of families' businesses and so forth, all in the guise of standing up against racism. And these tragedies that have taken place, the George Floyd one, I've said it straight out, murder. Mm-hmm. Okay, that's no questions about it. As pertaining to the recent one, and Brooks, is his Brooks or Brooks?
Rayshard Brooks.
Rayshard Brooks.
Right.
That one there is a tragedy in itself. And everybody wants to, Monday Night Football, comment on what happened.
Right.
And it was horrid what took place. But the following aspects of it is what's even worse, and that was the burning down of the business. Now you have 30 people out of work.
That was wrong.
That was wrong. Then the mayor coming out immediately making the judgment that it was an unjustified use of force, deadly force. Then the police chief stepping down. And then recently the DA coming out and basically doing a public indictment of these two officers. Mm-hmm. And as you know, my family are police officers. I know a lot of police officers. In fact, I was talking to my good buddy who's going to be my district director in the office if I'm blessed enough to win the seat. And we were discussing that Rayshard Brooks incident. Legally, you look at it, and it was a justified use of force. It was a tragic justified use of force because a person's life was taken. But I think that the community, the United States, the community abroad, has to have an honest discussion, not only about what are the protocols of the police department and police officers using use of force, using deadly force.
Right.
Is also what is the expected protocol of citizens? What is the expected protocol of a citizen? When does a citizen cross a barrier that he actually loses all of his rights at that point? Now, is it drinking and driving? No, you get caught, you put your hands behind your back, you get arrested, you get taken in. But I think that when there's an assault and battery against an officer, and there's an escalation of force by the citizen first, it's almost like all bets are off. Even though the police officer is held to a very high standard of protocols because they're supposed to try to de-escalate. Right. They're not supposed to, you take a swing at me, I step back and I shoot you, right?
Right.
No, there are all kinds of levels of protocols they have to go through to detain a suspect. All those protocols were taken. I've had a lot of people telling me that a stun gun, a 50,000 volt stun gun, is not lethal. No, you look up the legal definition of a stun gun, the prods, It's considered a less lethal weapon, not a non-lethal weapon.
Right.
It's less lethal. If it hits certain points of the body, it will kill you. There's no questions.
That's very true.
And so you look at what took place in that situation, as horrifying as it is, the loss of life is always bad. Don't get me wrong, it's always bad. I'm never going to say it otherwise. But there was in our youth, if you got into a fist fight, somebody would come in and they see the circumstance and they say it was mutual combat.
Right.
Shake hands, go home.
Right.
Right. In that situation, it was, to me, it was a justified shooting. Horrid outcome.
Right.
But it was justified in the sense that you had a situation where he was leaving. And I put a little bit on this on the community as well, because in my days, I was a manager of a Jack in the Box, and I used to work the night shift, 2:00 in the morning. What signal is 2:00?
Oh yeah. Oh
The bar's closed.
The bars, right?
So
Absolutely.
at 2:30, from about 1:30 to 2:30, we had the bum rush at Jack in the Box for tacos and coffee,
Right.
and burgers and stuff, right? We never called the cops on anybody. If somebody passed, we had several people pass out like that in the line. All of a sudden, they're waiting in the line. They put it in the park. We go out there.
And
Hey, wake up!
Right.
You can park over there. Go sleep it off, right? Because we didn't want them to necessarily get in trouble. I didn't want to be responsible for calling the police on them and getting them in trouble. But you went out there, you knocked on the window, and you say, "Hey, why don't you go over there and park
and move it along?"
Right.
I'm going to weigh in here real quick.
Yeah.
I'm going to draw a distinction between what happened with Rayshard Brooks and what happened with the half brother of Robert Fuller. Robert Fuller, in my opinion, based on what I know, it's horrible to make sound, got what he deserved. Because my understanding of the reports that have come out thus far, he got out of the car and he started shooting, and the cops returned fire.
Right.
Rayshard Brooks gets a little bit more difficult because I watched that video over and over and over again.
Right.
And I've had some heated disagreements with my brethren because
So
he
have I.
well, I mean, it started off nice enough. They woke him up, he pulled over into a parking spot.
Yeah.
They took him out, they started talking to him, he's cooperative. Now, that's when things get a little dicey because they started to handcuff him, and that's when the struggle ensued.
Absolutely.
That was his.
We have a phone call. 202. Yeah, go ahead and put the call through, and I'll talk to him. Hi, Bob.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean,
Hello.
it started off nice enough. They woke him up. He pulled over to
Hi,
a
Bob.
parking spot. They took him out. They started. Hello.
Yeah, hi, Bob.
It's Will.
Oh, Will. No, Will. We're going through our opening statement, so we're going to bring on Bob at 7:15. So listen in, and we'll talk to you after the show.
Okay.
All right,
So
so it started off, and then the problem began. And I lay a lot of the blame on Rayshard Brooks. He should have never struggled with the police.
Right.
He shouldn't have. Now, he was already on probation, and that's probably what went through his head. I don't know.
I didn't even know that.
No, he was on probation. Yeah. So for him to struggle and then grab the stun gun and then take off running. Now, he got shot on the back. That shouldn't have happened. You have to put yourself in the cop's shoes. Here's a man that grabbed a stun gun. Now, hindsight being 2020, and I know I'm back to your quarterback in this. If you're using a stun gun on somebody and you're moving, my understanding is when you shoot a stun gun, you have to be standing still and the person has to be standing still in front of you for it to have any effect. But what the cop has said thus far, and I can't remember his name, he said he saw a flash. And it's very possible in that moment he forgot all about that it was a stun gun. It's very possible that he did.
Let me chime in on that because that was part of the argument we had. The officer that shot him, he had his stun gun. Mr. Brooks took the stun gun from his partner.
Right, from his partner, right.
So he didn't know what it was. all he saw, because when he was running, he actually went and he pulled out his stun gun. The officer pulled out the stun gun.
I saw that.
He saw him turn, and I talked to my buddy who's an LAPD cop. The stun gun actually sounds like the discharge of a 22.
Right, and it has a flash on
And
it.
it has a flash.
Right.
And it's black. It looks almost like a smaller gun. If you see him on the cop's belts, it looks like a gun. So in the heat of the moment of that, and you think that he shot him in the back like he waited. No, he was running and he turned sideways and he shot the stun gun, and then he turned, and at that moment you're watching.
You see the cop pull his gun
The
out.
cop shifted hands for his stun gun to his left hand. He pulled his gun out and then he shot. And by that time the back was completely turned, and he shot 3 rounds out, hitting him twice.
And that was so look at the mistakes that everybody made. The first mistake was, if you want to put it on the people at the Wendy's, yeah, they couldn't have gone and knocked out, but that gets into what we talked about, the racial bias. They might have seen it with a black man that was scared, number one. Number two, you got Rayshard Brooks that struggled. Number three, even if we want to say that the shooting was justified, you look at the mistakes that occurred afterwards. After the man is down, Rayshard Brooks is down, he's not quite dead, the officer kicks him. And then the other cop stands on his shoulders. Those 2 acts in and of themselves was egregious. Then, I agree with you. The mayor should not have come out and fired that cop off the top. No. He should have put him on administrative leave like he did the other gentleman, and done more investigation. It's no different than when Obama came out and when he pilloried that cop and he had to apologize to the man actually ended up buying him a beer. You can't condemn somebody without getting all of the facts.
Well, this is where you have a trial by public,
right?
Public trial, and at this point, these 2 officers, are they ever going to get a fair trial?
I don't know if they will.
It's going to be real difficult.
It is.
Because the politicizing and the racial aspects of it is going to mandate that they get charged. It's going to mandate that they get convicted. It's going to mandate that heavy stuff is going to come down. Otherwise, that city is going to be fearful of major rioting. Because the incident took place, they burnt the Wendy's down immediately.
Well, there's already been rioting.
So you
there's
look at
there's been protesting.
You look at what happened with Rodney King when they found him not guilty. I mean, L.A. burned down.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, it's horrifying.
It
now,
was.
Most everybody, they don't understand facts. They don't get into the facts. Now, this is the FBI Uniform Crime Report in the Washington Post. Last year, there were 10 million arrests by a police. 10 million. Okay. 1,004 officer-involved fatalities. 41 of these were unarmed. 19 of those were white people, and 9 of them were black people. Even one is way too many, but 41, shootings, right?
Right.
Out of 1,004, 41 were unarmed, right? So mistakes were made.
Yes.
Okay. You look at the percentages, right? And it's pretty good. You think of a police force, 10 million arrests, 1,004 use of force with weapons.
Right.
41 of them, the opposing guy didn't have a gun, right? That's a minute amount. And I'm not dismissing it. This is where you get into the internal affairs, the investigation departments, the DA's office, city attorney's office, if need be, both of them. You look at the FBI diving into the Department of Justice, see if any civil rights have been violated, constitutional rights and so forth. All these mechanisms are there. This is why last week when I pulled out the thing, I said it was all BS. Okay, you look at how many officers were killed in the line of duty. How many? 89, same year. 89. So you look at Chicago, and this is what they don't talk about. On the one weekend, 82 people were shot within 48 hours, and of the 82, 19 died. And that was black on black.
Oh, yeah,
So
it
there's
happens.
a severe conversation needs to take place in the United States about what is truly happening in it. And can there be improvement? Absolutely.
Well,
our police departments are nothing like they were back in the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. We're now in 2020, and we're still making improvements.
Well, it's just like.
But on that note, we're going to go to break, and when we come back, our guest, Bob Woodson, should be on the phone. Now, Bob Woodson was born in Philadelphia in 1954. He joined the United States Air Force and earned his GED. He graduated from Cheyenne University with a bachelor's degree and from the University of Pennsylvania. He's been a strong activist within the community. He was an advisor to George W. Bush. Mm-hmm. He's written several books. He founded an organization called the Woodson Center, helping out minorities and black communities. And he's also founded the 1776 Institute initiative, where they do the same thing. They identify leadership, they go into the communities, and they advance that leadership. So we're going to go to break. And we come back, hopefully Bob will be on the phone joining us. See you after the advertisement. Welcome back to the Voice of Reason. And yes, we do have our special guest, Bob Woodson, on the phone with us. Bob, I've already done the introduction of who you are, and we're very excited and feel very honored to have you on our show to discuss the issues that are taking place today in America and within the black communities and in all the communities, because it's affecting everybody. And the title, as I described to you, is about racism versus classism in America. And what I wanted to start off with right off the bat for our listeners, because I think that most people have conflated the definitions and the actions of these three words, and that is prejudice, discrimination, and racism. Can you give us your definition of those three words, starting off with prejudice?
Well, I mean, prejudice isn't bad. I mean, when we select red instead of blue, one can say one is biased towards a certain thing. It doesn't, but in the context of social thing, it means that you're biased against either somebody who's a different racial or ethnic group.
Right.
And racism is just another way of saying the same thing. When the discrimination is tied to a person's race, prejudice could be against a certain religion. It could be against anyone who's different. But when you refer to racism, it is disrespectful or hostile to a given person because of their skin color, their race.
Precisely. It's the same thought process that I have developed as well pertaining to it. You know, prejudice is just creating an opinion or a judgment of something that you have no life experience or knowledge of. You just have an opinion. And the best way of describing it is a 5-year-old kid saying, I don't want to eat that broccoli. Have you ever tasted it? No, I don't like it. You know, and it's like, well, why don't you give it a try? No, I know I don't like it. It's that's a prejudice right there. And it's the most harmless way of describing prejudice. And when you get into discrimination, it's an action. It's an actual action of the prejudice. And it could be towards anybody as well. You just don't like them, so you discriminate against them. It could be sexual orientation, it could be size, it could be this, it could be whatever. It doesn't matter still. You're discriminating against that individual based on your prejudice. Then when you get into racism, it's a higher degree of the prejudice and discrimination, and it dives into more of a hostile attitude towards a person of color. And this is where you're going into the action again, and it could be extremely hostile where you're doing something of extreme damage to somebody. Ted, do you have a question? I know you know me and Ted have talked off camera quite a bit here about the subject matters, and I know he's got a lot of thought here.
Well, you know, nice to talk to you, Bob. I had an opportunity to take a look at the interview that you did with Lou Dobbs, and I know in it you talked about that you felt that welfare was at the core of the destruction of the black family and the black community.
Yes.
I would take.
I have documented that.
Yeah, and I would take some issue with that. Only reason being is because of the fact it appears to me, in my opinion, that seems to overlook certain issues that as a race and as a people that blacks have been experienced from time immemorial. You know, the massacres of black towns that happened beginning in 1873 and continuing up until 1923. So would it be fair to say that with a lot of the protests that have been going on, do you think the anger that blacks are experiencing, do you think it's misplaced?
First of all, why don't we go back and discuss the breakup of the family?
Sure.
Because that's at the core of it.
Mm-hmm.
Let's deal with some facts.
Okay.
Studies reveal that right after slavery ended, one of my colleagues finished some research. They took the records of 6 major plantations, and they found that 75% of every one of those children were being raised in two-parent households right after slavery, thousands and thousands.
And I agree with that. That I do know.
Let me finish. Two-parent households continued into the even in 1930.
Mm-hmm.
When we were even in a depression between 1930 and 1940, when we were in a depression, when blacks were being lynched every day, driven out of towns, we were no political representation. Even in the midst of that virulent racial time, 1930 to 1940, we had the highest marriage rate of any group in the country. And we were also our culture was controlled by our Christian values so that elderly people could walk safely in our communities without fear of being mugged. That two-parent households continued up until 1962, 63. In 1963, 85% of all black households had a man and a woman raising children. In spite of all of the things, the rise of the Klan and all of that, nothing was able to destroy those bonds.
Okay, well, let me ask you, let me interject right there, Bob. Let me interject right there and ask you a question. Now, you and I both know, and everybody knows, that welfare was part of the New Deal program in 1935 by Franklin Delano Roosevelt at the time. So,
no, sir.
Yeah, no, it was back at that time. It was part of the New Deal because
Social Security started there. Welfare, the government intervention into the marketplace sent checks to individuals. It was Social Security. Welfare did not start until it was not embraced. Let's say it started back then.
Right, it did.
But it, as you know, in the black community, it was a stigma attached to being on relief.
Now, that it was. And see, here's my opinion. See, my opinion is that even when the advent of welfare first came along, the black family was still intact. It is my opinion, in my opinion, and I may be the sole voice about this. I believe that what happened during the 1960s, when there was the advent of free love and drugs really perpetuated in the black community, it is in my opinion that it was at that point in time when the commitment to the family fell apart because it seemed like it was no longer necessary with the way the societal mores were going forward at that time. I think it was on that period of time that when that began the disintegration of the black family.
I totally agree with you. That was one factor.
Okay.
But not the most decisive. So we'll agree on that.
Okay.
There was a cultural shift. And a lot of those white kids from rich families who were tuning out, getting high and all, with them, they could go back after and take a bath, and then go back and live with their white rich parents.
Right. But we couldn't do that.
We couldn't do that. So you and I agree on that.
Right. Now I think as part and parcel of that, though, is that at the time of the Great Depression that it happened, that when the stock market crashed, the majority of the jobs that blacks had at that time was in manufacturing, mercantile, low paying, and unskilled labor. When the market crashed, the unemployment amongst blacks rose up to 50% because the white community started hiring more whites. So I think at that time, so you had a conflagration of things that suddenly came together. You had the free love that was going around, and then we began to experience the economic disparity at that point.
But even with those economic hardships, the black family in 1930, 1940 did not disintegrate. Even in the midst of those challenges, it never did. They stayed intact.
They didn't start falling apart until the 60s and in the 70s.
Yeah, no, I agree. But what I'm saying is it was a progression. I'm not saying that it happened all at one time. What I'm talking about, it was a slow erosion of things, and I think it came into a penultimate until the 1960s.
No. The erosion did not start. The facts are, our family stayed intact throughout that whole period of the Depression. They stayed intact. Trust me. I'll show you the proof of it. But let's go back to the 60s. You're right. One element of why the disintegrated was a cultural shift, but that only attributed to Smallbrook. There was two sociologists at Columbia University, a couple, Cloud and Piven. They were socialists. And they said, one of the things we need to do, this is right after the Watts riot, they said, what we need to do is that we need to flood the welfare system so that we can bring about an economic crisis, so that the inconsistencies and hypocrisies of capitalism would be revealed. So if we separate work from income, it means that men will be redundant, and therefore we won't need fathers. You'll see kids will drop out of school. There'll be all kinds of despair take place. But okay, that was it's written down. But they couldn't just do it with a policy track. John Lindsay was the mayor. The poverty programs then began to make welfare more attractive. Then the Black Power movement said that the nuclear family was Eurocentric and therefore racist. So they waded in and attacked it. The feminists came in and said, "Oh, fathers are so they were glad." So then welfare, because of these forces and the poverty programs, the OEO officers began to actively recruit people into welfare. Welfare then began to shift from social insurance to an entitlement to reparations. And so the stigma was removed from it, and because welfare, you remember the time when welfare, you had to declare fraternity in order to get it. They said that was an invasion.
I remember. Yeah, no, I remember that clearly. Okay. I remember that clearly.
Okay,
but here's the issue though for me also, Bob, is that to accept that welfare was that might have been one of the contributing factors, and I'm not trying to take from that, but even when you look at it, even at that time, you had more Native Americans and Alaska Natives that was on welfare at the time that this program was implemented than there were blacks. So you'd have to, but what I'm saying is, so what you're saying is that the way the blacks reacted and responded to it was different than other races.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Let me give you the numbers. Let me give you some numbers. What happened within the period of just 3 years, millions of blacks in Chicago, Philadelphia, Detroit, particularly New York, flooded into the system. At a time in New York when the unemployment rate among black men was 4%. And that is because the garment industry needed people.
Right.
And so it wasn't, it was not in response to unemployment. So as soon as began to flood into the welfare system because of the combination of policies, of recruitment, welfare became more attractive. Then you saw the decline of the family that Moynihan identified. And so you went from 1960 to down to a 30%, a 70% drop over a short period of time.
Okay, so but don't you also have to consider the fact that during that period of time, you had 1.7 million blacks that moved up north in search for jobs. And when they did that, a lot of the families were left at home. The wives and the children were left at home while the fathers left to seek employment elsewhere. And this is what I mean. I think that it's a multi-layered issue. It isn't just one issue with it being welfare. Because when you look at the fact that after the Great Depression, and you're right, the black families, we did become strong and we did stay together. But when jobs became more and more scarce, when you look at everything that happened with what happened in Detroit, you look at the housing ordinances, the segregation housing ordinances that were passed in 1901, 1910, and 1911 in Baltimore. When you look at a combination of all of those things, with the scarcity of jobs, and like you said, the appeal of welfare, because they felt that, or some felt that there was no other option for them than that.
No. You're mistaken on that. Okay, I'll give you some examples. Let's look at some numbers. We're talking about in Chicago in 1929, even with redlining, and we were steering us to neighborhoods in 1929, Chicago, in the Brownsville section. There were 731 black-owned businesses. Blacks owned $100 million in real estate assets just in Chicago. The same thing with Durham, North Carolina, in the Hayti section.
Oh no, and I'm familiar with that. Just like in Wilmington, North Carolina. But just like you had the Black Wall Street that was in Greenwood, Oklahoma. That was in 1921. What happened is that got burned down.
Yes, but it was rebuilt in 13 years.
But it wasn't the same.
Rebuilt.
But it wasn't the same after that. You can even use California as an example. Venice Beach back in its heyday was black owned. But what happened? What happened is the blacks started selling the property because they could get the money, and now it's a predominantly white neighborhood. Because again, as part and parcel, you have to take a look at the economic disparity as well. You have to. You can't ignore it.
One of the things, studies done by John Sibley Butler at the University of Texas at Austin documented we had 900,000 farms. We had farmer co-ops.
Yes.
We built and every city had their own hotel. We had the Wallahaji in Atlanta, the Carver and the Calvert Hotel in Miami, the St. Teresa in New York, the St. Charles in Chicago. We have our own railroad in 1868, the Chesapeake, Maine, Jardine Railroad Company in Baltimore that ran for 18 years. And so we had capital assets in every city. But all of that changed with urban renewal starting in 1948. Urban renewal destroyed more of the black commercial district in America than anything the Klan or anyone could do.
Well, if you want to call it urban renewal, I would call it urban displacement. That's how I look at it.
I call it Negro removal.
Exactly right.
Bob,
what happened was under the Truman administration when he signed in 1948 eminent domain.
Right.
They were able. All that area up in New York on Fifth Avenue where Columbia Law School is, they was all black businesses.
Right, and it got claimed by the city.
Over by the government and sold to LaGuardia's friends.
Right, that's exactly what happened. That's exactly what happened.
And that's because the black community did something that I was always opposed to, and that is integration. As a civil rights activist in the 60s, I said that we should never have argued that separate is inherently unequal. Because if you say it's inherently unequal, anything is all black is all bad. And that's what we did. We integrated ourselves right on out of our own businesses. But because urban renewal was resisted by the business leaders in these communities, but when our black politicians got elected, they were the ones who sold us out.
And I'll agree with you there.
They were the ones who sanctioned urban renewal.
Right. And that we do agree on.
I was in the middle of that fight in the 60s. I was right in the middle when they used the demographics of low-income black neighborhood as the bait, and the switch came when the money was spent.
Right.
They built firehouses. They built downtown. But let me just say one thing about that. In Atlanta, I was on a panel with Mayor Jackson when he got elected.
Good old Maynard.
And I asked him, I said, Mayor Jackson, you're about to start revitalization, urban revitalization. Why are you improving Peachtree Street where the white businesses are and not Auburn Avenue where the black businesses are?
And what did he say?
But you see, well, you know, Nixon's policies. And I said, no, the president is not compelling you to build downtown because Maynard Jackson and these politicians struck their deal with these white business leaders, but they can use race to cover their tracks. That happened then, it's happening now.
On that note, Bob, I think this is the first time I've just been very quiet and listened, and now you know why on our phone call, Bob, I said, you know, I have a lot of respect and love for this man, Ted. You know, he's an extremely intelligent and wise individual. And we're going to go to advertisement to pay our bills, and we'll see you on the other side. This is the white guy.
I'll ask for more time.
Girl, Bonnie the loose leg.
15 seconds to
You've been getting more time all night. And you still lie.
BS doesn't work here.
Go ahead, give more time.
You could have a lot more time if you showed up to one of my debates.
I accept the League of Women Voters invitation. That's why I'm here.
The complete voter suppression. The League of Women Voters LA chapter was the one who invited him to the 5 debates with the battered women's organization, with a synagogue, 2 churches, and the American Legion. And he turned down them all flat with the League of Women Voters moderating. I didn't have a problem with it. I've never had a problem with it. I think it's a fantastic organization. I've never berated the League of Women's Voters. You berated women in general just by the way you run your office.
Hi, my name is Ted Durden, and I want to take a moment to talk to you about trust, and I trust churchandlaw.com. When it comes to workers' compensation and employment law, you can trust churchandlaw.com. If you ever need legal advice you can rely on, it's churchandlaw.com. Black and white, no gray, churchandlaw.com. 818-230-3110, churchandlaw.com. A law firm you can trust and count on.
Like the civil rights movement.
Welcome back to the Voice of Reason, and we're still gifted by Bob Woodson. And if you ever want to look up Bob Woodson, you look up the Woodson Center and also the 1776 Initiative and what they stand on. One of the comments that I love about the 1776 is those suffering from the problem must be involved in the creation and implementation of the solution.
Right.
You know, Bob, we're discussing a lot of history. And it's fascinating to me. I love culture. I love listening to the history of other ethnicities because I know mine, American Indians, and I know whites, and I know American history quite well. But most people are not being taught about black history, real black history, what really took place. And to me, I think the listeners right now, the ones that are listening, are probably being fascinated with the back and forth between you and Ted right now of understanding what really took place. I would like to go into now, because, you know, we do have only about 20 minutes left, is going into after the 60s, going into the involvement of the government in classism, where they started to, because you started touching upon that, where the white politicians and the black politicians started selling out the black community. And it still goes on to this day, because Ted and I have discussed this quite often, and that is our Democrat Party, the Democrat leadership, and our press have weaponized the word racism. And everything is racist now. It doesn't matter what it is. Everything is racist now. How much is that a detriment versus the classism? Because I think classism is way more of a detriment than the racism. Because if we really look at this country right now, our last president was black. Our last couple of attorney generals were black, both a male and a female. We've had several black UN ambassadors. We've had, as you pointed out, there's still a lot of black CEOs of Fortune 500 companies. A lot of capital is within the black community. However, everybody is focused on the poor black community. And how do we help? Because this is the same thing in American Indians. American Indians, there's a lot of broke reservations. And they expect the cavalry to show up, the government to show up, and it's like, wait a minute. And we have a term for American Indians that turn white and sell us out. We call them red apples. They're red on the outside or white on the inside. They sell us out. And you're discussing basically the same thing. So you look at these politicians right now, how are they using the racism, classism against the black community, and what should the black community be doing to stop this?
Well, I left the civil rights movement after Dr. King died over the same issue, because there's an article that I have on my office written by reporter Bill Raspberry back in 1965, October 29th, and the headline is, "Poor Negroes are not gaining from the gains of the civil rights movement, not benefiting from the gains of the civil rights movement." I led demonstrations in Westchester, Pennsylvania, 30 miles west of Philadelphia, Bayard Rustin's hometown. And I remember leading demonstrations for 3 months outside of Wyeth Laboratories. And when they desegregated their workforce, they hired 9 black PhD chemists. Mm-hmm. And we asked these brothers and sisters to join our movement. They said, we got these jobs because we were qualified. This happened to me 2 or 3 times when I realized that I was in the wrong struggle, that a lot of people who suffered and sacrificed most in the struggle for civil rights did not benefit from the change. Because Dr. King said, what good does it do to have the right to live in the neighborhood of your choosing or eat in a restaurant if you don't have the means to exercise that right?
Right.
And so I believe that it wasn't just race alone. And so I was advocating economic development,
there you go,
business development,
so
that people could earn more money. But what happened is that a lot of the politicians, people who were civil rights leaders, became elected to office, and they were the ones who ministered the $22 trillion in poverty money that flowed into those cities, where 70% of it went to people who provided service to. So we created a commodity out of poor people,
mm-hmm.
and back then, and so the biggest. So it's not surprising in the last 50 to 60 years, where all these inequities and poverty and violence has taken place. The question is, if race were the problem, then why are blacks failing in institutions run by their own people? And it's because
that's an important question.
The biggest income gap is between lower income blacks and upper income blacks, not whites and blacks. And the issue is class more than it is race. But they're using
mm-hmm.
race to prevent anybody from raising questions about what culpability do they have in the despair that's going on in low-income black communities.
Well, that's exactly what they do, because what it is it's political pandering of the worst kind, and I hate that more than anything else, and it is something that and Lou Dobbs said it during the interview, and I think you disagreed with him, but I agree with him. I think it's a situation that the Democratic leadership have really exploited. They really and truly have. Yeah. They have really exploited the way the blacks feel about the way that they've been treated by quote unquote white America. And Larry Elder during the interview said something, and Mark and I have even talked about on the show. I grew up in the South, Bob. I grew up with the KKK, with the Klan, with all of that, being told in a town, Benson, that population about 250 people, you don't want to be around here, come dark boy. I lived through that. But in spite of all the challenges that I faced as a black man, I'm sure just like yourself, we became successful in our own right. So there's no reason that any average black person cannot succeed on their own, as long as they have the wherewithal, as long as they have the drive, as long as they have the ambition, and they create the means, they can be successful. And I think for too long they've gotten mired in quote unquote being kept down. It's like I used to tell my counterparts in high school, who's stopping you from studying? Who's stopping you from going to the library? Okay, if you don't have enough books in the school, library got free books, you can go there, you can study, you can do that. I used to help my friends who finally listened to me. I used to help them study. So we have to shoulder some of the blame. We have to shoulder some of the blame. We cannot constantly shift it, nor can we shift our responsibilities to the federal government. We can't. It's like when Spike Lee and a lot of you had black activists that were talking about reparations to blacks and all that. I said, no, I would rather see it invested within the minority communities, creating jobs. If you improve the infrastructure, that creates jobs, that creates construction, create jobs and opportunities. That's what we need, because what we have to do is we have to bridge this economic disparity.
Well, Ted, and Bob, correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm more the white guy in this conversation. I think that creating jobs, yes, is a very important thing. But I think what's more important, to me, and this is what in our community, the American Indian community, it is fostering and creating leadership. Finding the young men in a community that may be fatherless, right? They're living in a single mom's home. Mm-hmm. It's going back into the community and fostering the leadership and the ability and the self-esteem of individuals that think that they're the forgotten ones, they're hopeless. Right. Because this is what we're watching. And Bob, you chime in because you're watching these.
I think you're right. It's a combination. A transformed heart needs busy hands and a full stomach.
Right.
Yes.
If somebody who's going to transform their attitude, you must provide a means for them to take care of themselves. So it goes hand in hand, but it begins with your attitude. And what's troubling about what's happening today with these particularly liberal white socialists, I call it white supremacist socialists,
yep.
Who are sending the message to low-income blacks. They're being used again as a bludgeon against the country. And they're saying to them, if you are dropping out of school, it's not your fault. If you are mugging and shooting, well, it's not your fault. If you're taking drugs, it's not your fault. After all, it's institutional racism. And nothing is more lethal than giving somebody a good excuse for their failure.
Yeah, but here's the problem I have with what you just said. There is institutionalized racism. There is systemic racism. What that means. No, what I'm going to tell you. I'll tell you exactly what it means. It is no different than what the average person on the street does. When you adopt certain beliefs based on what your preference is, because statistics will show the majority of white-owned businesses, if there's a white man and a black man that have the exact same qualifications, they're going to hire the black man. They're going to hire the white man. If they get a phone call with somebody that has more of an ethnic-sounding name than somebody that doesn't, they will hire that person that has the lesser ethnic-sounding name.
Is that more of a prejudice versus institutionalized racism?
No, because again, it's like we talk about. Because when you choose someone of the same qualifications, and at the end of the day, if it's simply based on how they look as opposed to the qualifications, that's racism. Because you're not making the determination based on a skill set. It's based on how that person looks and your level of comfort. Because let's keep it real. Whites will feel more comfortable around whites. Once you peel back the skin, then they may look at as far as the personality is concerned.
I don't know about that, Ted. There's a whole bunch of white people.
But wait a minute. Are you saying?
I can base some of that, and the blacks will do the same thing. They'll do the same thing. Okay.
That's what I'm saying. To what extent? Let me just ask you then. What extent is that the basic?
Well, I'll tell you. But I'll tell you what the fact is. When you have the fact that that the top 1% or 10% of this country is ran by white America, so that is going to have a much larger and broader impact on any minority. It just is. That's unavoidable.
Whenever I hear people talk about institutional racism, I hear it being used as a dodge. Like to tell me, if institutional racism were so pervasive, then why are blacks who are running all of the institutions in the main centers where we are failing?
I can tell you exactly the reason why. I can tell you why. Because we drank the Kool-Aid. That's why. We drank the Kool-Aid.
You're telling me, wait a minute, do you really believe that white people are so powerful that they can compel black people to miseducate their children or poorly serve their own people.
It's not.
Do you believe white people have that kind of power over us?
I'm going to tell you just like this, Bob. If you have a black man that has a high position with a white company, do you think he's going to do anything that's going to put that job in jeopardy if he hires a black man? No.
I'm talking about a white company. I'm talking about where the mayor is black, the school board is black, the healthcare system is black, the foster care system is black.
Yeah.
All of those institutions are run by blacks. And in Washington, D.C., where we have that condition, every 5 of them was under court order receivership because of incompetence.
But at the very same time, there's something that you're overlooking. But there's something there's something. No, and I'm gonna answer that question. I'm gonna answer that question for you because it still comes down to economic disparity. Because if you have somebody who has a level of unemployment, then they're gonna have a higher level of poverty. You're going to have a higher number of people, even to your point, that's going to be on welfare. You're going to have a higher level. No, I'm not. I'm not dodging your question. No, I'm not.
In a city where the institutions, all the major institutions, the housing programs in Washington, D.C., where we've been run by blacks for 40 years,
mm-hmm.
we have the highest per capita expenditure on education and in 8 different categories. We spend more on our poor people in Washington on 8 categories than any other place. We spend $16,000 a year on our education, and they are 48th in outcomes.
Wait a minute. Who spends more per capita? The United States?
No, I'm talking about the D.C. government gets from the government and its taxes. We spend more in 8 different categories of poverty. We lead the nation in per capita expenditure. So we're spending more money and getting less. Now, you tell me how institutional racism causes all of those people who have been running these institutions for 40 and 50 years. Why do we have all this despair and decline and inequity in these cities that have been run by blacks for 40 or 50 years?
I'll tell you, it's because there's no accountability of the individuals running these institutions and a demand for actual production for the money. There's just no accountability. That's it. Well, that's because this happens within our community, American Indians, and that's why we call them red apples. I mean, all of a sudden, like you said, Ted, they drink the Kool-Aid, they become powerful. They don't care.
And that's exactly what happens.
In working in diversity, I've been in diversity about for 20 years.
Black America, low-income blacks, the one thing that is worse than racism is treason.
Yes.
That the people who are supposed to be trusted to take care of you,
yes,
if they betray you, someone who betrays me is worse than a bigot.
Right.
Yes.
Because bigotry is external.
I agree with you 100%
on that.
And
treason is something that is committed by people who you trusted. And I can go on and tell you all kinds of scandals, like in Atlanta, Kwame Kirkpatrick in Detroit, who ran City Hall for 10 years like it was
his personal bank. Right.
Yeah. On that note, Bob, we're going to do our last.
Thousands of black pensioners are only getting a portion of their pension, but no one talks about that. Tell me how institutional racism deals with that.
Absolutely. Bob, we're going to take our last break. I want to see and hear you on the other end of this break. We're having a very spirited conversation. It's a short break, so it's only 40 seconds. So we'll talk to you in a moment.
My erstwhile opponent says I don't accept debate invitations. I accept the League of Women Voters invitation.
The League of Women Voters LA chapter was the one who invited him to the 5 debates with the Battered Women's Organization, with a synagogue, 2 churches, and the American Legion. And he turned down them all flat with the League of Women Voters. Welcome back once again to the Voice of Reason with Ted Durden and our special guest, Bob Woodson, with the Woodson Center and also with the 1776 initiative. Bob, some of the, because we're getting into our wind up here, about 8 minutes left. What kind of programs, coming out of this big rioting that's taking place throughout America, the unfortunate, and I do call it a murder of George Floyd. That was outrageous. The last couple of things that have taken place, the use of force, deadly force in Atlanta. It's a tragedy in itself, but there's so many more tragedies. We talk about the death rates in Chicago, where you have black on black killings every day. I mean, for every one death of a black person by a cop, you have over 300 deaths by black on black. What should we really be focusing on now in specific? Again, I always laugh at myself and say, here's a white boy, because I always say that, American Indians, we look at outsiders as you can't tell us what to do.
Right.
And I always say that our problems that we have as a community on reservations and so forth has to come from within, even holding our own accountable. When it comes to our institutions being run by fellow natives, they get the money, they have the band councils, they have the schools, they dish out the money for grants to building houses and so forth. What should everybody in the United States, as a united United States of all ethnicities, really be focusing on? Because I don't think we're focused on the right thing. I think we're missing the cue, that it's massive classism, that you see the disparity in the protesters' eyes, black, white, Asian, mostly under 35 years old. There's this hopelessness. I see this hopelessness in their eyes. Because the classism right now, based on the ruling class, is suppressing all of the youth, not just in the black community. It is more in the black community, yes, I agree to that, because our politicians are using it. But when we watch these protests, all ethnicities, all colors are out there, because there's a hopelessness that's going across this nation of the complete lack of opportunity. And what should we be focusing on?
Well, first of all, you got to identify the problem. I just think that the peaceful protesters is about George Floyd. Burning down a Wendy's is not about George Floyd. That is about trying to tear apart civil society in the country. And we have to stop talking interchangeably about protesters and violent arsonists and others like that, because and I think a metaphor for what we're talking about is right there in Atlanta when this man was shot by that cop. Two white Antifa women burned down the Wendy's restaurant, owned by a black man, and hired blacks from the neighborhood. And so there's where the interest of low-income blacks is at variance with those who are using injustice to as a battering ram to tear apart this country, and they're making us appear as if that the 14 or 15 people white who are killed by whites is more than the 270 or the other blacks are killed by other blacks. That's the real problem. What we are doing at the Woodson Center is that on the 23rd of this month, we're having a live stream webinar where we're going to be bringing together of some young men who there was a place called Benning Terrace, 53 murders in a 5-square block area in 2 years. I work with a group of ex-offenders, a neighborhood organization called Alliance of Concerned Men. We went in and brought those warring factions to my office to negotiate a truce, and there was peace in that community for 12 years from 53 murders. So, and these young men, we're going to bring them back and we're going to bring the police who worked with us at that time, and we're going to do the same thing in Las Vegas. And then we want to have a model to examine how one intervenes in the black community to stop the black on black. I'm trying to shift the focus away from race to saying that black America has to address an internal problem. It has to confront the enemy within. And that enemy within is the 7,800 young blacks who are killed by other blacks each year. So we think we need to turn away, and concentrating on race does not get us there. And we have to support the police. We're aggressively in support of the police, because a lot of the people who are talking about defund the police, they live in gated communities. They live in safe places. the losers will be low-income people in whose name they are saying they're fighting for injustice.
Right.
Bob, how can they find this webinar if somebody is
You
interested?
can go to our website, woodsoncenter.org, and we have it posted there.
Okay. And what is your
WoodsonCenter.org.
WoodsonCenter.org, and the webinar is posted on there. And I know I follow you already on Twitter. I like your tweets actually. And what is your Twitter handle?
At Bob Woodson.
At Bob Woodson. Very simple. So everybody should follow Bob Woodson. Take a look at the WoodsonCenter.org and focus in on that webinar, because I honestly believe, Bob, that, and I've said this to quite a few of my consultants, I'm a congressional candidate out here in California. And I've told people for over decades, I testified in front of the FCC in regards to vertical integration and consolidation and our media's desire to create uniformity of thought, which is the front door to tyranny. And we're watching tyranny now. My first testimony was over 20 years ago. And media is, to me, the biggest danger in the United States right now. And because media is blowing up what is taking place, and they're not doing a authentic job of keeping their bias and their own opinion out of what they're reporting. And it's a disservice to every community throughout the country at this point in time. And I hope that we have an administration that will revamp the entire Federal Communications Commission, because our media giants are destroying this country with fake news. Yeah, with fake news,
but
biases.
I have really enjoyed this exchange.
Yeah,
I'm going to put this offer to you now, because our guest next week is not coming in. Would you be willing to join us next week, Bob?
I don't know. I have to look at what my schedule is like. It's pretty full, but
Okay.
I'll have to let you know.
Because it is like,
If I can, I will.
it's like Lou Dobbs said, this has been an extreme pleasure, and I do want you to come back. I will have my people contact your people, and we'll get you on the schedule, Bob, okay? But
Yeah, I'm going to be starting a weekly with Lou Dobbs.
I know. I
are?
heard
Okay.
that.
Oh,
That
kudos.
is.
He announced it on the air.
Yep,
Okay.
I saw that, and I loved it. Bob, thank you once again. It's been our honor and privilege to have you on our show, and I hope everybody out there has really gotten something and taken something away from this exchange. It's been a great exchange. Again, Bob, thank you. Ted, bring it on home.
All right, and thank you again, Bob. It was great talking with you. Absolutely.
Same here.
All right.
All right.
Bring this show to a close. We've had a very esteemed guest on the show, Bob Woodson. Very compelling man, makes a very compelling argument. We do need to do something. We do need to make a change, but it has to be done peacefully, not violently. And it has to begin at home. It has to begin from within and not from without. And remember, ignorance prevails when rational minds sit back and do nothing. Be sure to tune in next week.
You're listening to The Voice of Reason with Mark Reed and Ted Durden, only on LA Talk Radio.